As I say, my name is Dr. Ciara Staunton, and I am the project director of the recognition of prior learning in Irish higher education. So this project has been a government-funded project around the recognition of prior learning. It commenced in 2020, so we are now coming to the very end of the project. And I guess the title of the presentation was, scalable and sustainable RPL practice. And really what this project has done in this country and for the higher education sector is to really try and bring RPL from the margins of practice into the mainstream of our higher education sector. So this slide here highlights the 14 publicly funded universities in the Republic of Ireland, and all 14 were stakeholders in this project. So they all agreed and were partners in the project. So this is a very novel concept when you bring what are essentially autonomous and independent universities together with one common cause. That actually has been a key enabler of driving forward the practice of RPL in the sector. So it has been a very collaborative project from the get-go since 2020. The project at the beginning was very ambitious. So I've just provided here what the main purpose of the project was in its infancy. And the three main objectives were to continue to embed, streamline and promote RPL, particularly the recognition of non-formal and informal learning across the sector in a manner that is coherent and consistent. Because RPL for formal learning is the bread and butter work of third level institutions. We do that all the time and we do it very well. So the challenge is really to recognise work that happens outside of formal education settings. So work that learning that happens in the workplace, that happens in the community, that happens through other life activities such as volunteering, for example. So that was the real challenge. Another aim was to work with employers to increase access and progression opportunities in areas of skills need. So recognising our skills agenda by the government and where those gaps were and how institutions could be more agile and responsive to industry through using RPL. And finally, to enhance the sector's capacity to operate RPL by developing useful tools, materials, resources and professional development opportunities for staff. So those were three of the main overarching aims. And just over the next few slides, because without getting too much into the granular detail, some of the high level outputs from the project that has brought us to today, 2026, with the project coming to a hard end in December 2026, I just want to highlight to you some of the resources and items, outputs that were developed that have really set the preconditions for proper scalable RPL. So while we're not there yet, we have certainly laid the groundwork. And some of these documents and resources all are available at the end of the presentation. We're very happy to share them. As I say, have created the right mechanisms for unlocking the potential of RPL and really supporting not just staff, but full institutions to scale up their practice of RPL. So outside of the collaborative piece, and that was a key enabler, as I say, of the outputs which were developed because they were developed collaboratively among the 14 partner institutions, some of the things I'm going to talk about are across these four pillars. So our framework, the different staff development initiatives, our ability to collect data, and most importantly, thinking of the learner at the centre and what kind of resources and information awareness raising activities we have done from a learner's perspective. So like any good practice, policy is important. And while, as I say, policy, we do not have a single policy in Ireland specifically for RPL. However, it does appear across multiple policy government documents and skills agendas. So our Quality and Qualifications Ireland, QQI for short, is developing a framework and a policy that hasn't been launched just yet. But we do have an access transfer progression policy, and RPL fits right into that. But what this project has done specifically was develop one of these early outputs. It was a framework. And what was different about this framework was that working with the 14 partner institutions, it was underpinned by two core values. And the first was that learner-centeredness, putting the learner at the center. So when you work in a higher education institution, sometimes the learner can get lost in the business of education and then the design of curricula and so on. So the framework really put the learner in the center and recognize that the learner is central to the RPL process. And by learners, we mean everybody for whom third level education is a right, and that they should have access to it regardless of their inability to avail of the traditional access routes into third level education. The second really important aspect of the framework was the quality assurance piece, that showcasing and highlighting that the practice of RPL is embedded in the quality assurance procedures of each higher education institution, and that it does align with our national framework of qualifications, which we do have in Ireland, which is a really helpful way of scaffolding learning pathways for learners through our NFQ. So the framework was a really important seminal document, and what transpired from that was that all 14 partner institutions either rewrote or wrote from scratch or redeveloped their existing policies. So we can say now that of those 14 partner HEIs, 12 have published, 13 actually by now have published revised policies. And at least from a sectoral perspective, that means that 12 or 13 out of the 14 have policies which are espousing to the same principles outlined in the framework. And that brings a level of consistency and transparency across the sector, which is to the benefit of the learner. It also facilitates staff within HEIs to be able to practice RPL according to some of those key principles that are espoused in the framework. And those are all built from good practice and European guidelines, CEDAFOP, etc. The next area that was important to tackle for us, and it's a challenge that many countries have, I know certainly many colleagues across Europe share the same challenge, is being able to count. So collecting data around RPL in terms of the numbers of learners who avail of RPL, and I'm talking for the various aspects of RPL. RPL for entry, so in terms of access, for advanced entry, or for credit or exemptions. It's actually quite difficult to count those because once the learner is in the system, they are registered as a student, it's very difficult to know how they entered into the system. So technical work was engaged in as part of the project, but that is still a little stumbling block. So we have now integrated RPL into what is called the student record systems. And this is a government funded student record system that is in its second iteration. So by 2031, all institutions will be required to report on RPL according to the definitions that we have provided for it through our technical definition. So again, what we're attempting to do here is provide standardized data capture and consistency in what we are describing as RPL activity. So again, we see a lot of RPL activity happening across institutions, but being able to count it effectively has evaded us. What we were able to do in the project with project leads across the 14 partner institutions was manually count RPL learners over 3 academic cycles in the lifetime of the project. And obviously, it's the story that we hoped would be told, in that we see an upward trajectory of individuals through the lifetime of the project engaging and availing of RPL. So over the 3 academic cycles for which we could count data, we have almost 12,000 learners accessing programs via RPL. So we want to build on that continued upward trajectory of RPL learners entering into the system. In terms of how RPL is used, that data tells us that there is an even spread here, which is interesting, on RPL, which is used for entry to a program of study, but also RPL, which is used for credit and exemptions. And of course, we know that by availing of RPL for exemptions and credit exemptions facilitates a learner's journey in accelerating their journey through a program of study. And that also can mean a cost saving, but more typically for adult learners, it means those kind of learning opportunities are far more suitable to the individual's life, where they are working, they have family, they have other commitments. Advanced entry, also we see there almost 2,000 learners availed of RPL and advanced entry. By that we mean where a learner has been granted access to a program of study and have essentially skipped 1 or 2 full years of the program because through RPL they were able to demonstrate knowledge, skill and competency via RPL instead of having to take the modules of study. And again, that leads to an accelerated degree. One of the target areas of the project, and again, for the preconditions to support the practice of RPL across our sector, is in staff development. So not all staff know what RPL is. As we know, not all learners know what RPL is, and that is true of staff. So providing continuing professional development for staff in higher education became an early output of the overall project. So in 2023, we commenced with the digital badge in RPL. And this was designed in collaboration with the National Forum for the Enhancement of Teaching and Learning in Ireland, which houses all sorts of digital badges and CPD opportunities for staff in the third level sector. So that digital badge, I facilitated myself, runs over 6 weeks. And we had, initially we delivered it once thinking that we would have, a handful of staff who were interested and who were champions of RPL. But as of now, 2026, we have delivered 7 iterations of that badge, and we will deliver further iteration in the autumn. So the figures here speak for themselves. We have issued now almost 500 badges to staff around the sector. It has been a real success story of the project because the satisfaction rate is very high, and the qualitative feedback that comes back from that badge has been really exemplary. So we are keen to develop this further into an asynchronous digital badge that will continue to sit on the National Forum so that in the future staff can always avail of it in their own time when they are ready to do so. So the purpose of that badge was really, again, to give staff the confidence and empower them to be able to assess RPL applications, for example, or to consider curriculum design through the RPL lens. A program director, for example, does the learning outcomes of their program suit a candidate who may be applying for entry to that program based on experience and life achievements rather than formal education?
Ciara, just to say 4 minutes left total.
Perfect. Thank you, John. So in terms of then the key resources developed, some of the outputs which have garnered a lot of attention both within Ireland but also across colleagues in Europe are these. So our resource for staff, which highlights examples and exemplars of RPL practice, the how to do it, so the real brass tacks of how to tackle an RPL application. We have a toolkit, again, using the how do you benchmark? If you are assessing an RPL application and somebody's life experience, how do you go about that? So the toolkit is a really handy resource. It is structured around that typical 5-stage RPL process. Actually, I should say it's a 4-stage RPL process, but this project included a 5th stage, a first stage called information. So informing learners and informing staff about RPL. We also have spent a lot of time in that outward facing messaging to support learners around the possibilities of RPL. Priorlearning.ie has all of the resources, all of the institutions. It's a great hub for the project information. It has case studies, learner testimonials. Again, we're trying to distill RPL into language that is learner friendly and that encourages, again, and empowers people to feel that they could come forward and maybe put themselves forward to enter a 3rd level qualification. From a strategic perspective, it is important that we are not just developing the conditions for good practice, but that we are integrating RPL into all the important policy government level strategies. And here is just a list of them. To also join up the dots to say that RPL isn't something that happens in a silo. It is actually much bigger part of the whole lifelong learning ecosystem. And finally, where we're at now as the project comes to a close, these are the areas of work that we are putting all our energies into to secure future and sustain momentum going forward. So when the project is finished, that each of those institutions continue with the good work that has been put in and continue to develop and evolve the practice of RPL. So again, you can see here the different pillars in terms of communications, the community of practice, and infrastructures through the framework and the technical definition, the staff training and development through the asynchronous digital badge, etc. And all of these links, as I say, you can click into them to have direct access to those documents should anybody like to. So finally, what I would say after 6 years of a project, that RPL and some lessons learned is that RPL is a strategic enabler of lifelong learning, that the future of education depends on being able to recognize learning wherever and however it occurs, not just in the traditional classroom. Sustainable implementation requires collaboration across our institutions, but our learners, our employers, and our policymakers. And finally, that recognition is not simply about valuing the past, it is about creating pathways to future learning, opportunity, and participation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ciara. Unfortunately, we're basically at time. I'm not sure we have time for questions. I would ask, it looks like your deck is a little different from the one you sent. So if you want to send me the updated version, I'm happy to replace what's linked there. Thanks. There's a lot to learn from Ireland. And I learned that a couple of years ago in Kilkenny. So thank you very much. That's right.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for joining us, helping us round out our global representation.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. So we'll see you people over back in the main room. There's a couple of spotlights that are happening as Denis de Gagné finishes up. And we will pick up here again with Chantal Carrière, Lydiane Guidouin, and Donald Lorette at 12:30, an English presentation about adult learners and the making skills visible and valuable. So we'll see you back here in 10 minutes. Bye now.